Fire is something you think you already understand. You've felt it. You've seen it. You learned early not to touch it. Fire burns. That's the whole story, right? But stop for a moment and notice something strange. We talk about fire as if it eats an object, as if it's a thing that reaches out and hurts you, as if burning were a property like weight or color. But what is actually doing the burning? Is it the flame? Is it the heat? Is it something being transferred from the fire into you? Because if you look closely, none of those answers really explain anything. They just rename the experience. And that's the uncomfortable part. The word burn feels like an explanation, but it isn't one. It's a label your brain uses to summarize something it doesn't want to unpack. Because the moment you ask what's really happening, what your skin, your nerves, your atoms are actually experiencing, the familiar picture starts to dissolve. Fire stops being a thing. Heat stops being a substance. And that burning stops being an action. What's left isn't dramatic, it's worse. It's ordinary physics happening so fast and so violently that your body can't survive it. And once you see that, fire never feels quite as simple again. Let's slow this down. Not the fire itself, your intuition. Imagine you could zoom in, not metaphorically. Literally past the flame you see, past the light, past the color and the shape that your eyes recognize as a fire. A zoom all the way down to the level where nothing looks familiar anymore. At that scale, there is no flame, there's no orange, no yellow. No flickering tongue of fire reaching upward. There are atoms, carbon atoms, oxygen atoms, electrons bound together in very specific arrangements. Quiet, stable, ordinary. Now something changes. Those arrangements don it like the situation they're in. Not because they're angry or unstable, but because there's another configuration that's more favorable. Lower energy, more likely. So the atoms rearrange, bonds break, new bonds form, electrons jump to different states, and in that rearrangement, energy is released. Not released politely, released all at once, photons fly off. Nearby atoms start vibrating violently. Molecules smash into their neighbors harder and harder, faster and faster. From far away from where you live, that chouse looks like a flame. Now imagine placing your hand nearby. Nothing reaches out from the fire toward you. There is no burning substance traveling across the gap. Instead, those violently vibrating atoms crash into the atoms in your skin. They pass motion along, like one chaotic crowd slamming into another. Your atoms start vibrating too, faster than they're designed to handle. Your molecules twist into shapes they were never meant to take. Proteins unfold, structures lose their integrity. Your nerves wreck not to damage, but to change, to motion arriving too quickly, too intensely. Pain is your body shouting, "This is not survivable." And here's the part people rarely think about. If you could somehow slow this process down, if the same amount of energy arrived gently, spread out over time, you wouldn't call it burning at all. You might not even notice it. So burning isn't about fire, it's about rate, the speed at which energy is forced through matter. At this scale, there is no intent, no aggression, no danger written into the universe. There is only motion, arrangement, and consequences. And the word burn is what your brain says when it encounters a process it can't afford to analyze in real time. That realization should feel strange, because it means the thing you've been afraid of your whole life was never really a thing at all. This is usually where people try to grab onto something solid again, something familiar, something that feels like an explanation. And the word they reach for is almost always the same: heat. Fire burns because it's hot. That sounds reasonable. It even feels satisfying. But notice what just happened. You didn't explain anything. You replaced one mystery with another label. So let's slow down. What is heat? It isn't a substance. It isn't a thing flowing from fire into you. It is a description, a statistical one, a way of talking about how violently atoms are moving. So when you say a fire burns because it's hot, what you're really saying is, fire burns because atoms are moving fast. But that still doesn't explain why fast motion should hurt. Maybe the explanation is damage. Fire burns because it destroys tissue. Again, that sounds reasonable until you notice it's backward. Destruction isn't the cause, it's the outcome. It's what happens after something more fundamental has already gone wrong. So maybe the explanation is danger. Fire burns because it is dangerous. Now we've really given up. Danger isn't a property of the universe. It's a judgment your nervous system makes after the fact. Notice the pattern. Every explanation you've reached for comes from the same place. Human experience, pain, injury, survival. Words that make sense at your scale. But none of those words exist where the process actually happens. Atoms don't know they're hot. Electrons don't know they're dangerous. Energy doesn't know it's hurting you. At the microscopic level, there is no burning. There is only motion, only rearrangement, only consequences. And that's where intuition finally breaks, because the picture you've been using, fire as a thing, heat as a cause, pain as evidence, was never part of the universe's description of events. It was your brain's shortcut. And now that shortcut doesn't work anymore. If that feels unsettling, it should. Because once a burning stops being a fundamental explanation, you're forced to ask a more uncomfortable question. If fire isn't special, then what is? So let's rebuild the picture, but carefully. Not by adding new words on top of old ones, but by replacing the frame entirely. Forget fire for a moment. Forget flames, heat, danger, and pain. None of those belong to the level where the explanation actually lies. Instead, think in terms of energy and constraints. Every physical system has energy. But energy isn't a thing you can point to. It's a bookkeeping rule, a way of tracking how motion, structure, and change are allowed to happen. Fire is one particular way that energy moves from tightly bound chemical structures into looser ones very quickly. That speed is everything. Imagine two identical amounts of energy. One arrives gently spread out over hours. The other arrives violently in a fraction of a second. Your body reacts to them completely differently. Not because one is fire and the other is not, but because your biological structures have limits. Limits on how fast they can absorb motion without falling apart. This is the first piece of the new model. Fire doesn't burn because it contains something special. It burns because it forces energy through matter faster than structure can respond. Now let's push deeper. Why does that speed matter so much? Because matter isn't solid in the way your intuition imagines. Atoms aren't little billiard balls packed together. They're mostly empty space, held in shape by delicate balances of electromagnetic forces. Those balances only work within certain ranges. Push energy through too quickly, and bonds don't have time to redistribute smoothly. They snap, they rearrange violently. The structure collapses your scale. That collapse feels like burning. At the atomic scale, nothing dramatic is happening at all. Electrons change states, bonds reform, motion is redistributed. No pain, no danger. No warning, just physics following its rules. This is where the word burn really fails you, because it hides the most important part of the story. There is no special category called fire damage in the universe. There are only processes that exceed the tolerance of a structure. That applies just as much to fire as it does to radiation, pressure, acceleration, or time. Fire feels unique only because it delivers energy at a rate your body is particularly bad at handling. Now here's the mid-peak realization, the one that usually lands hardest. Fire isn't destructive, it's indifferent. It doesn't target you. It doesn't attack. It doesn't even spread with intent. What you call destruction is simply what happens when energy flows through arrangements that can't remain stable under that flow. The universe doesn't classify outcomes as harmful or safe. Those are human categories applied after the fact. From the universe's perspective, a flame and a sunrise follow the same bookkeeping rules. Energy moves, structures respond. Some arrangements persist, others don't. And this reframes something subtle but profound. The reason fire feels fundamental isn't because it's special, it eats, because you are fragile. Your senses evolved to warn you about processes that rearrange matter faster than you can survive. Pain is not evidence of malice in nature. It's a signal that a limit has been crossed. That limit belongs to you, not to fire. Once you see that, the entire emotional framing collapses. Fire doesn't burn things. Structures fail under rapid energy transfer. Fire just happens to be one of the most efficient ways the universe has found to make that happen. And now we can say something that sounds cold, but is deeply clarifying. The universe is not hostile. It's unconcerned with survival. It enforces rules, it allows processes. And it never slows down just because something can't handle what's happening. That's the real answer hiding behind the word burn. Not chemistry, not danger, not heat, but the simple fact that reality has constraints and life exists right at the edge of what those constraints allow. This way of thinking isn't philosophical. It shows up wherever energy is handled seriously. Look at engines. A car engine, a jet engine, even a power plant, all of them are built around the same idea. Not creating energy, but controlling the rate at which it moves. Let it move too slowly and nothing useful happens. Let it move too fast and the system destroys itself. That's why engines don't run at maximum combustion all the time. That's why materials melt, warp, or fracture when limits are exceeded. Not because fire becomes more dangerous, but because structure stops being able to keep up. The same principle shows up in industrial furnaces, welding arcs, rocket nozzles. Everywhere energy flows, engineers aren't fighting fire. They're managing constraints. If those constraints are ignored, systems fail immediately. not metaphorically, physically. So when fire burns in the real world, it isn't violating any special rule. It's following the same ones everything else does, just faster than you can tolerate. Once you really accept this, the idea doesn't stay confined to fire, because fire isn't unique. The same logic applies everywhere nature moves energy quickly. Radiation doesn't harm you because it's toxic. A pressure doesn't kill because it's violent. Acceleration doesn't injure because it's forceful. They all do the same thing. They push energy through structures faster than those structures can adapt, and suddenly something unsettling becomes clear. The universe doesn't distinguish between processes that support life and processes that destroy it. It doesn't mark some interactions as safe and others as dangerous. Those distinctions exist only in biology. From the universe's point of view, a flame, a lightning strike, and a sunrise are just different rates of energy redistribution. No intent, no preference, no warning. This is why explanations that rely on words like harm or danger eventually fall apart. They describe how we experience reality, not how reality operates. The universe runs on constraints, not compassion. And life exists not because those constraints are gentle, but because, for a narrow range of conditions, they happen to allow stability. Fire feels terrifying because it reminds you how narrow that range really is. The strange thing is, none of this feels dramatic in everyday life. You don't think about atoms rearranging when you light a candle. You don't notice energy bookkeeping when you warm your hands near a flame. Fire just feels hot, dangerous, simple. But the next time you hear someone say that fire burns, pause for a moment. Ask what's really happening. Not a substance attacking you. Not nature being hostile. Just energy moving too quickly through structures that can't keep up. Some things feel threatening not because the universe is cruel, but because it's indifferent. And life exists in the narrow spaces where that indifference hasn't yet erased the structure holding it together.